We talk about the employee experience and workplace, and that's the whole nature of this podcast. But compensation is a big part of that. And I honestly say we don't talk about it enough. And I don't necessarily mean the money thing, though that is obviously a part of it. My guests on today are going to talk about compensation, how we should look at it maybe a little differently, and how it's tied to development. Hold on, it's going to get interesting. I'm Russel and this is Relationships at Work, the Employee Experience and Workplace Culture podcast. Oh, compensation. It is always a hot topic, whether you're an employee or an employer. Everybody doesn't kind of want to talk about it, to be completely honest. We really do, and we just don't. I guess that's probably the sum of it all. Well, we're going to get to our guests very, very shortly, but first I want to talk about a couple of things I'm pretty excited about. Two things, actually, in fact. One, finally, Raw Notes is launching this Thursday, so by the time you listen to this, it might already be a thing. Anyway, it's going to be coming out every Thursday weekly, and in that Raw Notes, I'm going to talk about some things that are happening in the world, maybe some resources you might find interesting, some of the latest content that I've put out that you might have missed. It's going to be a buffet of useful things, so all you have to do to sign up to it is go onto my website, relationshipsatwork.ca or russellawlicker.com, whichever is easier to spell. I know my last name is not one of them. Anyway, up the top right, you get a chance to download my employee journey interviews. If you just sign up and download that, you'll be signed up. It is just that simple. And the other thing I'm excited about is frontline feedback. So there was this podcast I used to do called CX Storytime, and people really seemed to dig it. What it was a real story that I would walk you through, like a 50s old-timey radio play. It was with a moral of the story, some things you learned, but it really took you to that place and put you in the position of that customer having a good or horrible experience. I want to do that for relationships at work. I'm still going to be talking to the amazing brains that will help you and provide new ideas and ways of looking at things. But there's really something about being in the shoes of your employees, whether they're leaders, managers, frontline staff, what have you, but taking real stories and understanding that perspective, I think, is invaluable. And I'm excited to bring that into the Relationships at Work podcast. So I'll be doing that very, very soon. Keep your eye out for that. But I'll also ask, if you have stories to share, please send them my way. Send them to yourrelationshipsatwork@gmail.com. Just send it that way. I will share your story. I will not use any names. I will not use the names of organizations. I just want them to be a teachable moment, a lesson learned. And I need your help to do that. So please send it my way. I look forward to hearing from you. But now, the reason we're here, now we're talking to my guests, amazing humans. These two women go out and help organizations get their talent right, get their values right. And they've had some pretty good success at this. So I'm going to dig in and understand how compensation and development are actually a lot more closely tied together than a lot of organizations treat them. This will definitely help you think a little bit differently. Let's get to it. On the show today, we have Crystal, Henrickson and Annika. I'm going to get it right. Reinhardt. See, I tried to be more dramatic by taking a pause with it, so I'm going to say it again. Annika Reinhardt. She's smiling at me. I can see her going, yeah, finally got it right. Thanks. And here is why they are awesome. They are the co-founders of Talent Collective, a consulting agency helping organizations grow their talent through effective coaching, compensation planning, and career development. They've been featured on all the news outlets, CTV, CBC, Forbes, Globe and Mail, blah, 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 to talk about gender and pay equality. Equity. It's important to get that right between equality and equity. Crystal has played key hiring roles in companies such as Yelp and has advised 50 plus startups. She's a certified active coach. I'm not going to get into the acronyms. I'm just giving the full names here. And certified career strategist. over to Annika. Well, damn, she's a certified compensation professional, certified sales compensation professional, and a global word I learned today, remuneration professional. They each have over a decade of experience guiding organizations and leadership, whether they were in them or outside guiding them. And a breath. Welcome to the podcast to you both.
Thanks for having us, and you deserve an applause for this. Well done, Russell.
I stretched ahead of time. It was just sort of like bending at the knees sort of thing. It was good. Thank you again to be on the show. So excited to talk about our topic today, which is we're going to be talking about compensation and professional development and how they're linked and how they're important, all the employee experience. But first, I want to know about your experiences. So I'm going to throw out the question that I throw out to every guest on the podcast, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
Okay, let me go first because I'm going to do the worst one, and we don't want to
Okay.
finish with worst, right? Okay. So my worst was I was asked to start at a company which wasn't located in the town that I lived in. It was actually quite far away. So I was going to be working remotely. And I was asked to fly to HQ for my first week. And not one person, not even the founder who arranged for me to start on that day, nor the folks who put that date into my employee contract, remembered that I was flying in that day or that week. And the office was quite an open space office with no real front area. So you just basically walked into the fray, and it was an awkward half hour or so while they tried to figure out who I was because no one knew what I looked like because they had hired me remotely. Womp womp womp.
If you could just go sit on the beanbag chair over there, we'll go figure out what we're going to. My God,
Yeah.
that's horrible.
Is this a sales rep trying to sell us office furniture or something? Like,
That is shockingly shitty. I am so sorry. That is horrible.
perhaps now it's obvious where my bias is in wanting to create good onboarding experiences so people feel a sense of belonging right from the beginning and are able to make a good first impression.
It's amazing how the worst experiences are like, okay, that I'm going to make sure never happens to anybody else ever again. Thank you for sharing and revisiting your horror, Crystal. I
Thanks,
appreciate
Russell.
that. Thank you.
It's a good place to
Annika,
share.
Well, I'll go the complete opposite direction, but it also kind of plays into some of, interestingly enough, some of the work we do today. So my absolute best employee experience was when I was able to work with my company and negotiate with my company to go from full-time to part-time. And that was at a time where flexible work arrangements just weren't the thing. So I might be dating myself here, but I really loved my job. I had just passed probation. I was quite excited about the job, but it was very clear that it wasn't challenging me as a whole human, and that I needed a creative outlet. And I really wanted to try and kind of get this little side hustle off the ground that had nothing to do with the work that I was doing. And I worked with my manager through finding some solutions how I could go from 5 days to 4 days and eventually 3 days. And I ended up working for that company for almost 8 years in a part-time capacity, which they had never planned for, and had the best time of my life, and was incredibly loyal to the organization and did some really fantastic work, I think. And again, it's like, I think, kind of thinking about flexibility in a workplace and trying something out. It was definitely an organization that was quite large and still is a very traditional organization. So for them to even be willing, and for my manager to be willing to try out something completely different, was a really great experience. And it's like, I think it also opened up some of the path that I went on and led me to kind of going out on my own with something completely different than what it was that I started, and doing the work I do with Crystal today.
Funny how loyalty comes from conversation. And I always have this conversation with people. It's like, it's not rocket science, it's relationships. You will do more for friends that do stuff for you. It's a back and forth. It's one of the reasons I call the podcast Relationships at Work, is literally it's about the relationship, and people get so stuck in these cookie cutters. This is how we've always done it before. So I love that story.
See, it's heartwarming.
It is
And
much better than Crystal.
it was really interesting because again, it's like I think it was a very it really helped part of what Crystal and I do today because before kind of really diving into the compensation world, I helped a lot of our clients with their negotiations, and clearly negotiating for part-time or more flexibility at work was part of that. And then that kickstarted a whole other career path, which kind of led me down to become this compensation professional that with all these certifications that you just mentioned earlier.
Yes. So let's get into compensation and that word. I kind of want to define what it means because compensation immediately money comes to mind, but maybe it's not as clear as that.
Well, we're going to do some compensation 101 for you and everybody who is listening. So in the compensation world, like you said, the word compensation might mean so many different things. When you talk to HR professionals or compensation professionals, there's kind of like 3 tiers to compensation. So tier 1 is what we call total cash compensation. And that would be your base salary and anything that we call short-term incentives. So that's your typical bonus. Right? So that's total cash. The next layer up is what we call total compensation. And that would be any total cash compensation plus, especially in tech companies, equity. Right? So it's these long-term incentives. And then the level up from that is what we call total rewards. And that would include your total cash, obviously the equity piece, as well as any other rewards. So that's your vacation, your health benefits, retirement savings, flexible work arrangements, whatever that may be. This is what falls under the umbrella of total rewards. So 3 different words, again, that often folks, quite frankly, don't know the terms, but very important to make distinction between those 3 things.
How are they determined in an organization?
I think, again, it's like anything that's cash is like the financial piece. So that's, often kind of what will just fall into that. In terms of total rewards, it kind of depends on what approach the company takes. Hopefully it is somewhat market driven, right? And is like looking at what the market is doing, what's happening out in the market, what are employees wanting and needing. Hopefully it is somewhat employee driven in the sense of you've asked your employees what's important to them when it comes to, total compensation and obviously total rewards. And basically kind of combining those 2 things will generally help a company figure things out. I think there's table stakes, right? Clearly, vacation is a mandatory piece that you need to do. However, going above and beyond might not be. Health benefits, also very table stakes in most organizations. So there are certain things that you just see pretty much across the board. And then there's other things that I would say are more trending these days.
So you work for an organization, you generally have that determined as to what the compensation will do because you agreed to it when you applied for the job.
Yes.
What are the linkages once you're in the organization to their development through the organization? Crystal, I'm kind of curious about your side of this. Is you come in, you get your, here's your buffet of what you get when you sign on, but that's part of the employee journey, is it not?
Yeah, so if we're thinking about what we'd think of as like career developmental frameworks and how they tie together with compensation, we would think about what kinds of performance metrics or role criteria is linked with compensation, and then how to support employees through the role that they're in so that they can produce and be productive and also be rewarded at the best extent possible given the contributions that they're making to their organization. So I think about like perhaps we want to talk a little bit about what career levels means. Perhaps we want to talk a little bit about what job profiles mean and how those things support companies in making the compensation decisions that they make once folks are inside the organization.
Okay, then fine. Go ahead and talk
Do you
about it.
want to talk about career levels?
Crystal, why don't you talk about this? I was like, I think we should talk about these things. I was like, yes, we should, Crystal. Go for
Weird. I
it.
don't know where that came up in my brain. Let's suddenly talk about job profiles. Weird.
Everybody should know about these things.
Yeah.
So, job profiles we see as a foundational building block to building great career development structures inside of companies. So, it's basically like taking your job description. Perhaps some people will only think of that as like a job advertisement that they have seen, but it's a internal document, a job description, and it's like putting it on, 10x. So, it's the responsibilities of the role plus the success criteria of the role or of those responsibilities, plus your skills that are needed to do that role, plus the behaviors that are needed to do that role, plus the experiences that you needed to bring to do that role. And that serves as a foundation piece to help folks perform in the role, both when they're just starting it, so that developmental zone, as well as what it means to be fully performing in it, as well as what it means to be maybe accelerating or exceeding expectations, something like that in that role. So also there was a third thing I missed saying at the beginning. There's competency zones are another piece of the building block. So I just started to talk into competency zones, but that's really important to have that clearly defined so that folks that are in the role and folks that are managing the people in those roles, they all feel like they have a very clear idea of what it means to be performing well in the role and what a stretch means in the role.
What I think is really interesting with the job profiles is there's lots of like interesting data and studies out on this particular topic. And this is also something we always ask when we go into organizations, and we ask employers, "Are you clear on what you got to do?" Right? And you'd be surprised how often the answer is no. And that's challenge, right? Because if we don't have clarity around our roles, we get disengaged, and we aren't performing obviously to the level we're supposed to because we just don't know what the expectations are. So it seems like a pretty simple thing, right? It's like, it's a job description. Come on, folks, right? But in many organizations, these things don't exist. And, they use their job posting, their job ads, but there's no clear definition of that piece, which then often leads again to folks potentially being disengaged and not as motivated and not as driven to perform. So again, lots of interesting studies out on that. And it's so fascinating that every time Crystal and I go into organizations doing this type of work and asking employees, and that is a very common theme that we also hear kind of supporting what we see from studies in the marketplace.
What do you
go ahead?
I was just going to stop on that for 1 sec. Is what do you see from employees, organizations, culture, work employee experience when there's those job descriptions, regardless if they pulled it from the job posting or not, but then the job changes and nothing else does? It's like, oh, we're just going to keep adding new bullets to that job description. No, you're still in the job. You still make what you make, but we're going to keep adding more duties. What are the impacts to that? How do you address that?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because, again, building more structure around it also comes with maintenance of that structure, right? So when we encourage folks to really be diligent about developing these job success profiles, there's two things we also recognize. Number one, in small organizations, often it's all hands on deck, right? And it is okay, and that's just what it is, right? We wear many, many hats. Again, Crystal came from startup world. I can't even count all the hats she has and wore. But the other piece to that is, how long is it okay for you to kind of step in and help out versus, oh wow, this has now become part of my job. So what we encourage companies to do is like, you got to get on a schedule to review these pieces and also allow employees to provide input so that they can say, hey, hello, flagging, I've been doing this thing for more than 3 months. We should talk about how that impacts my job and potentially my compensation, because these job profiles is what we as compensation professionals use as the baseline to match to market, right? So that's how we kind of get the data. So it's very important that companies kind of understand that if you commit to some of these pieces, that it needs to be reviewed, and there needs to be some process for both sides to be able to update and make changes, and knowing what that triggers, right?
How does compensation motivate the employee? Like, we've talked about this framework in which they're going to work in, but then Crystal, you mentioned stretch assignments, stretch opportunities that aren't looked at as we're just piling on more work. These are opportunities to grow. So how is that linked to motivation in that experience?
Yeah. So generally, when people are clear about what the reward is going to be from performing at, let's call it like a higher or more advanced level, that can be a motivator in itself, because usually in a lot of organizations, it's not clear what the way to promotion or to advancement is, right? A lot of times that feels like it's done in a very vague kind of subjective type of way. So that can be a real demotivator if you don't know what you could be doing to accelerate your own career development inside of an organization. So the flip of that is make it really clear what it would mean to be excelling inside your role. What does that mean in terms of the salary band that's associated with it? So, yeah, could it be, could it be that you started in a role, like you were saying, stuff got piled on, hopefully the role got redeveloped, and then it got matched to the market so that you could know kind of, or the organization could know sort of where in the market it sits. And then inside the role, would it be more motivating to know that actually, you're new in this new role that we've just kind of piled onto you, and there's a lot of learning and opportunity to grow and advance within this role. It's like deepen your skill set within this role. And by deepening your skill set, or like deepening the experiences that you have within this role, these are the trigger points where we will then compensate you for that skill development, because your contribution would be tied to the fact that your skill development is helping our organization in a deeper or more beneficial way. And so there it's tied to it.
This is a very interesting topic, because every time I kind of talk about what Crystal's saying, it's like your performance basically is directly connected to your salary. There is two camps out there. There is the camp that's like, no, those are two separate things. They shouldn't be overlapping. They shouldn't be reviewed together. And there's the camp that's like, well, wait a minute. I hired you to do a job. So if you perform better in your job, it should be reflected in your salary. It is very clear that Crystal and I are on camp connection, and because I just don't see the point of disconnecting it. And I think by connecting it, which, let's be honest, again, a lot of companies don't do a good job at that, you are creating a framework for the employee to understand I can grow within my salary range and within my job. And there are at some point other opportunities above, hence the career levels we talked about, right? What is kind of above? How do we define what is above? From a here's me, the individual contributor side, to here are some management tracks. How do these interact? Again, all of these things are connected. And if you, in my opinion, are like saying, it's like, oh, let's do a performance review. Well done. You're meeting expectations. And then there's like, oh yeah, and then we'll review your salary 3 months from now. I'm just like, that makes no sense to me. It's just, I get quite passionate about it, because I do have a lot of these conversations with folks where I'm like, so how come, right? Why is that disconnected? Is it because your organization hasn't linked it, because it's missing some pieces, be it proper job success profiles, proper career development frameworks? What's holding you back? Because at the end of the day, that hopefully is a motivating factor.
I'm hearing something. We haven't said the word, but it seems like it's overarchingly. I make up words. It's a word. You knew what I
Coined
meant.
here,
Good
folks.
communication, bad grammar. Transparency. Why is transparency so hard? Because everything you're talking about is, let's tell people the grid, let's tell people their next steps, let's give them the monkey bars of the career they could take, let's give them an idea of the skills they'll need to acquire to make the next compensation grid, blah blah. But it seems like such a mystery when people get into these organizations and they don't know which way is up or sideways. So why is transparency not obvious?
It's very, again, it's like I'm such a fan obviously of this topic. And I think there's a couple challenges with it. I think some organizations not having built out the proper frameworks makes them afraid to share anything, because they don't know, well, is it right? Is it wrong? Are we at market? Are we not? Do we have all the pieces together? So there is a little bit of this hesitating, because they're just not sure if they've done it right. Right. I think the other piece too is still this notion in companies that's like, oh, well, if one knows, like if folks know too much, they're going to ask for too much. Again, to me, that comes from a place of fear, because the frameworks are not there. If you have all the frameworks, there is no reason. So I'm going to do a shout out to one of our clients, Lumen 5, that have done a fantastic job in being transparent with their structures. But the only way they were able to do that is because they put in the work and the effort to build all the right pieces so that they could use it and communicate to their employees so that they can be more transparent around it, right? So you need to be willing to put in the work in order to become transparent. And I see, again, it's like there is this a lot of hesitation, and sometimes, it's, to be honest, it's rightfully so, right? Because you want to be prepared. And I think one of the pieces Crystal does a lot with folks is preparing them from a communication perspective too, because there's so many questions that will come, right? And you better have managers in positions where they actually can answer these questions. So you got to spend the time, right? You got to spend the time building it properly so that you can be transparent, because it's not as easy as just like, ta-da, right? I wish. But if you want to do it properly, then I think that's an important part, is put in the time and the effort to actually do the work.
Communication's a good one to nail on, because I'm a communication nerd, so I get all over that. What are we needing to communicate when it comes to this? Because I mean, what's the best way to communicate that? Maybe that's the better question.
The managers are going to be the front lines of communicating this in the one-on-one settings, in the informal settings. So to me, the best way is having the managers like fully prepared, which means early and often communication with the managers so that they can feel like they've been well supported to understand, what's gone into the decisions that are being made here, what is the essence of how we do compensation in our company, and then how do we as the managers have these conversations with, the individuals in our team over and over again. To me, it often will fall down, so to speak, if the managers aren't clear and the managers, they don't feel confident or competent in having these types of conversations. So it's a little bit more than just, ta-da, here is what we're doing, and close the door, we're not going to talk about it. This is just what the policy is, let's say. The hardest part, the thing that's the most important to me, is how do the managers show up in those conversations when, they get asked the question on Slack, for example, in a direct message, or, in the olden times when they're stopped in the office hallway and asked a question. right? Or when somebody comes to them and says like, "Hey, I've been in my role for, a year now. I'd like to talk about compensation or about progression," and the manager is not sure what to talk about there. The managers have to be really clear and feel really competent in it.
Let's start setting up for success and go maybe at the very beginning of the employee journey here, even maybe the hiring process. There is a big clamor, and you can certainly see this in online forums, of transparency when it comes to compensation in job postings. That seems to be a much bigger topic that was even a couple of years ago. Thoughts?
Lots.
Lots of thoughts. So many thoughts. So many thoughts. Obviously, again, being a big supporter of transparency, clearly, we're seeing, especially in the US, lots of movement in mandatory, in requirements and mandatory kind of push to have those, be it Denver, be it Cali, like, I mean, so many places in the US are kind of pushing for it and have been implementing it. And, it'll be very interesting to see what happens here. Ontario had kind of pushed into that direction. Obviously, BC hasn't in to that extent. And there is, it's been talked about, but nothing has happened here. But to your point, it seems like there's a little bit more of a grassroots movement with obviously employees asking for more transparency, especially over the course of the last year where the market has been so hot. And again, companies kind of facing this, well, what are we going to do with that? Same situation as with sharing anything internally. It is incredibly hard to do so if you haven't done the work, right? Just going out and kind of posting something is not going to be beneficial for anyone if at the end of the day you're not sticking to what you're kind of saying there. And it's if people push hard enough, you're going to go above and beyond or below anyway. So you're going to have a strategy in place as to how you're going to deal with that in the hiring process. The other big piece here too is what you see might not be what's all there. So in the compensation world, and with a huge discussion right now around, well, what are we posting? Are we posting the full salary range, meaning from the minimum all the way to the maximum? And the maximum is what Crystal talked about earlier, being like, you are excelling. You are like way above and beyond, right? What is expected from you. Should we just post minimum to midpoint? Midpoint is generally, of a salary range, is generally reflective of what somebody fully proficient should be receiving, because realistically is like, you might only want to hire in somebody who's growing in the role, who is proficient. You might not want to push above, because then you have to think about, what am I going to do with these people because they need a promotion soon, right? So again, it's not as simple as just putting some numbers. You really have to put in some thought around, well, what is it that we're willing and comfortable to post? How can we talk about this so that it's very clear this is a hiring range versus a full compensation range? And there are, discussions around, well, should we only post the minimum? Right, and say it kind of goes up from there. So lots, again, it's like, and I don't have the answers of what's right or wrong. The only thing, again, I will encourage companies to do is really think strategically about, if you're posting this, again, how are we going to back this up? How are we helping our managers understand? And the other piece, which I've also run into some of these within some of the US states that have mandatory postings, if you post externally, you better make sure you're also ensuring that your internal employees know what's going on and what the ranges are, which, believe it or not, there is a disconnect. It's like, well, they can just go on the job posting and see what you're posting there. Why are you not sharing this internally? So again, kind of having a full communication plan ready and being thoughtful, quite frankly, about this. So as much as I am a very, very big fan of transparency, it has to be thought through. Like, that's because once it's out, there's no going back.
I think the thing that's coming out as I'm listening to Annika share is whatever the company decides to do, they're signaling something. They're signaling something about their culture, whether they decide, in Canada where it's not mandatory, they're signaling if they have done the work by actually being really thoughtful and posting that whatever they decide to do, the hiring range, the full range, that make whatever decision you want, but they've done the work to come up with all their philosophies, and now they're signaling to the job market the work that they have done in there, just as companies who are, in my opinion, not being thoughtful about that or not even saying why they haven't posted the salary range, then if they've chosen to be more restrictive on that knowledge, they're signaling something too. So I think there's a lot more movement around this and a lot more thoughtfulness, maybe a lot more discernment too amongst the potential, like the candidates, the potential employees about what types of companies, what types of culture that they want to work in.
And what is it saying about those cultures? Because I see this being tied not only from the compensation standpoint, but also from the development standpoint, is them basically in big neon lights saying how they value or don't value their employees.
It's a big neon sign if you're looking for it.
Yes, exactly. Right. And I think this is, again, it's like having seen over the course of the last year how much more educated our candidates and our employees have become. Right. And it's like, just again, having been like both Chris and I have been doing this work for quite a long time, and just seeing the changes in terms of information that is available, conversations that are happening. It is quite exciting times for, employees and candidates, because information that was never readily available is everywhere now. And again, it's like you have the opportunity to engage more in these conversations. And with that, heightened awareness around some of these pieces. And again, bigger push for companies to think more and, quite frankly, quicker, right, about, well, what are we going to do about this? So I'm hopeful that we're seeing more acceleration around transparency, because there is a little bit of that grassroots employee and candidate movement that are demanding some of these pieces. And if you want to attract the best, right, you gotta figure out where you fit in.
I would say it's even, I know we're saying grassroots because we're talking about it's not mandatory, in Canada here. But if we just look at some of the, recent research or recent studies on this type of topic, like McKinsey in, I think, was that in 20, that was this year in 2022,
This year, yeah.
um, is saying that, people don't, it's not that people leave their bosses. That's like, yes, relationships, etc. But actually, what they leave is not having this level of transparency, not knowing what the career growth means, what their development opportunities mean, like how they can use their strengths, how they can, be best rewarded in the talent marketplace. That's what they're leaving, or in another way of saying it, what they want to join. So if you're really a organization that is true to wanting to attract the, best talent, then you'd have to create the quote unquote like best environment, and the way that you compete is by, revealing these things and having done all the that hard work to make your company, you know be this way from the inside out.
It's also a little generational because I I'm a Gen Xer and I would put up with a lot more crap than a millennial or a Gen Z would, because they seem to be, and I'm being very general here, obviously, but they're seeing websites like Glassdoor and other things as opportunities to be transparent about the culture, the compensation, and the frameworks when their own organizations won't. So if people are being more savvy, they're finding this information. Overworked, underpaid, Glassdoor, hate this organization. People read that. Let's get them on the right foot, because you mentioned earlier, Crystal, about onboarding. What is the right way to onboard new staff that sets them on the right foot to understand the compensation and the framework they're about to enter into to set them up for success?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if there's one right way. I think all the ways are very thoughtful ways where the experience is being curated and being as transparent as it can be. To me, I guess the right way is it starts before the person is hired. it actually started when the posting of the job description went out into the world, and the potential new employee saw that. So, if we're thinking about the whole experience and being thoughtful from, it's kind of like looking at the whole customer funnel, if you will, right? It's not just when they pay money to you, it's when they first interact with your brand, for example. So with this, it's like it starts when the first interaction with the brand happens or with the company happens. And the best ones are ones that bring people along and educate them at the right levels through the whole candidate experience that they're having. And then that continues the same thing that they're experiencing when being a candidate. It's kind of like the quote unquote, like the dating phase that's still experienced when we move into, the marriage or common law stage. We still have a similar experience. There's no quote unquote like bad surprises in here because we're educating them all along the way. I think those are the best onboarding experiences.
If I may add, because I think one great tool, almost like your marriage contract, I'm going with it, is
Good metaphor. Keep going.
right, is compensation and rewards philosophy. So often, again, that is a really great starting point for organizations to really think through how do we want to value and reward our people, in spending some time with that and using that as part of your onboarding experience, no matter if it is on on your website as folks come to you, or as it is when they come into the organization, to shine a light on, hey, here's how we position ourselves in the market, here's how we do performance reviews, here's how career development looks like for us, hey, here's all the rewards that we offer and all the benefits that kind of come along with this, here's how we deal with when the market changes, right? So being very, very transparent that way, and often that comes in the form of a comp philosophy. Very fascinating to me. I would say about 2-3 years ago, there was no movement on companies having compensation philosophies. It was kind of like maybe just over half would have them. And again, within the last year, we've seen this massive jump where lots of organizations, pay scale, salary.com, they do some analysis on this, and we've seen jumps to like almost 80% of companies actually now having comp philosophies, because they need a tool as part of this onboarding experience to share with companies, with the employees, and share within the company. So a great tool, I always say, is like, if companies are not doing this, that is a great way to start and kind of help candidates as well as employees really understand is, what is it that you're offering here?
So I have to ask, compensation philosophy, what is it? You mentioned it like 3 times.
Yes,
And I'm like, well, we got to dig into that. Yeah. You love this thing, but what are we talking about?
What is this magical thing? So again, it's like often, it is, it can be a document, or often is a document, although we've seen them in video formats and all kinds of other things. And again, it is a reflection of how a company values and rewards its employees. It really considers trying to meet employees where they are. It talks about their positioning in the market. It really ties into, here is our organization, here's where we're going, and this is how, again, we want to compensate folks. It talks about the why, like, why are we compensating folks the way we do? Why is this important to us? It often ties into values. So if you have, I always laugh about this, if you have a value of transparency and there is nothing transparent around comp, there's a bit of a conflict here, right? So comp philosophy can pick up on some of these things. So we often see some really great tie-ins into the values. And it will outline, quite frankly, that total rewards kind of package, right? What are the financial incentives we have? What do we have around well-being? What are we doing around career and professional development? What are we doing about our work environment? Remote, flexibility, all those pieces. And hey, what other perks do we have? And sometimes Lily is a bit of a marketing tool for folks, and also have organizations that obviously use it quite strategically to communicate to their leaders, executives, to their managers. Here's how we position ourselves in the market. So again, a very key tool, in my opinion, from a communication perspective, but also from a retention and attraction perspective.
How do you handle consultants in an organization? Because they seem to have a different pay structure. And they'll come in and conceivably look like they get paid a hell of a lot more to do the exact same work as staff that already works there. And then they go off and they leave again. As consultants yourself, I don't need to throw you under the bus.
It's like, yeah, are you trying to throw us on the bus? No.
but it does tie to value, and it does tie to their compensation. And they are, if with transparency comes comparison, to be blunt, whether it's within the organization or for those coming out. How do you approach that?
Very interesting question. And when I think about it, again, it's like I'm thinking, in my head, I'm thinking about these salary ranges, right? So again, we're talking about you have a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum of a range potentially, right? If I were to hire a consultant, I don't hire a consultant who's fully proficient. I hire a consultant who goes who knows their stuff inside out. They're super deep in it. So realistic from a salary range, they would be on top of the range. They would likely be quite high level, right? Depending on what you need. I mean, sometimes you might, hire somebody who's kind of more an intermediate level, but potentially for more strategic projects, we're looking for quite high level folks. So again, they would definitely be in a different range. And the other thing, hence compensation philosophy, as we all know, consultants don't have that full package that I just talked about, right? There is none of that. There's no bonus, there's no vacation, there's no health benefits, there's none of those pieces that, again, us as an organization we're offering you. It comes back to the fact it's not just about money, right? It's about that total rewards piece. And again, what we're trying to instill in companies too is to make sure their employees understand the total package, be it through total reward statements, right? Where it's like, Lily, we're listing off all the things and being like, ta-da! It's not just $1 million you're making here. It's actually $1.25 million, right? Wouldn't that be nice? Right. It's kind of making sure that people have a full understanding, especially if equity comes in some of these other pieces, which again, as a consultant, potentially the rate might be higher, but if we're looking at total compensation and total rewards, it likely will balance out. Communication, right? Ensuring that people understand that it's comparing apples to oranges, really.
What is the canary in a coal mine for an organization that is getting to a point where they're going to need to hire an organization like the Talent Collective, where they may have to look and go, oh, okay, do we have a structure in place? Do we have our compensation framework figured out, our philosophy? What are the first steps to sort of figure that out from, for lack of a better word, an audit approach, where they just trying to figure out their situational awareness? Where do you start?
With an audit. It's actually funny. It's like, that's what we first do, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. And I think sometimes when we come in and do these audits, it's also nice surprise for companies, because it's not all bad. You know what I mean? Is like, if we're looking at the whole piece, it's not like, they often come to us like, people running away, they're asking for the world, we don't have the resources, or it's like, I thought it's that, I heard that was the price, but now it's not. So it's kind of being like, whew, let's take a deep breath, let's actually look under the hood, right? It's kind of like, it's hard to say how, like Ferrari might look nice, but I don't know how well that motor is running, if it's actually performing to what it should be. So it's really looking under the hood and really seeing it's like what a company has and what they don't have, and doing a bit of an audit. And that can be hard to do on your own, right? But I think we already mentioned a couple things. It's like, to me, the priorities are, do you have a comp philosophy? If no, likely we should work on that. Are you properly set up for your career frameworks, be it your career levels or your job success profiles or profiles in general? No, probably an area to work on. And then after that comes, well, let's actually work on your salary ranges or bands or structures or whatever that may be, because often folks want to jump to that. There is a lot of homework that needs to get done, but those are kind of the two or the three things that often we see companies being like, if I see those things, it's like, clearly we're going to have to start working on some stuff, while also recognizing you are likely doing some great work already. Right? So they might be like, I don't have any of these things, and they come to us, and then we look on that and say, well, actually, you have some really great job postings. Maybe, we can turn those into some really great profiles. Or, wow, you have a really great suite of other rewards that maybe other companies don't have. Did you know that, right? You're above what other companies are doing in terms of vacation. So sometimes they just don't know because it's just kind of naturally developed. So it's also giving them kudos for some of the things that they have done. And again, helping them prioritize what's first, what's a priority now, what's a medium priority, and what can wait, because it can get quite overwhelming.
What is the biggest benefit to getting it figured out from a compensation and linking it to development?
Well, I don't know if it's the biggest, but one of them would be something along the lines of effectiveness, productivity from the people that are in their roles. Most of the time, what we see is people feel so much more stable once they have access to a career development framework, once they understand how compensation is actually, done behind the curtain. The productivity tends to increase because people feel like, well, one, that they've been taken care of, right? Like they feel like we actually really care about them because we put all this energy and effort into figuring it out. And two, they just really understand. So all that fear that's flying around tends to dissipate, and stabilization happens. Even in chaotic environments, some stabilization happens. So I'd say that's one benefit.
I think if companies are thinking about scaling, you've got to figure this out. Otherwise, you're tripping over yourself. So basically, making sure that the resources you have are well deployed right now, build the processes that can actually scale so that you don't end up being one of those companies that have 300 or 500 employees where then you have to start. Like just the time, effort, resources, money that needs to go into fixing that at that stage, it's a totally different ballgame, right? So it's actually, we really recommend thinking about this, when you're quite small, because all of these pieces can scale,
Before the
right?
canary
So
in the coal mine even exists
that's
or
right.
is needed.
Right, and being proactive about it. So again, it's like you can deploy those resources, time, and energy elsewhere if you thought about it early. And how great is that if your HR team is not overburdened when you have an HR team way, in the future, when they're not worrying about how on earth with everything else am I going to do this work. So I do think the scaling is a really big part of why you should think about it early on. And again, it's like, I think we talked about this now, through the course of our discussion here today, is from a retention perspective as well as from a recruitment perspective. Why wouldn't you? Right? It's like, it's almost, again, it's like you are helping yourself, you're helping your company in really being very clear on what you offer, and also attracting those that feel that this is in alignment with what they have to offer and where they want to be.
I'm going to put a big old pin in it there. But I have to ask the one question I ask at the end of the podcast, which is, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
I think every time you share an idea, an opinion, or even directions or instructions, actually really pause and ask the person that you're speaking to share their thoughts and their opinions or their answer, or open up the discussion, and then really listen to what the other person is saying so you can have a true, meaningful dialogue about whatever it was that you were talking about. Even just that, to me, that one small thing of asking a question that doesn't get answered with a yes or no or fine can be huge for relationships developing deeply.
And I'm going to take this a little further, especially around the asking about new ideas and improvements and processes, or just, seeing if employees have some of these thoughts. Let them run with it. Try it out, right? I'm always thinking back to that manager that allowed me to try out this flexible work arrangement. There were no rules or regulations, and it was a very large organization around if we could or couldn't do it. And he was like, you know what? Let's pilot this. Let's try it out. Let's look at what's working, what's not. And we tweaked my flexible work arrangement quite a bit, right? To get there. But am I happy that he did, right? That he said, sure, what do we have to lose here, right? Except for you either proving your point or not. And we can always go back to the old way, right? That doesn't run away. So I think just allowing folks to really execute on some of those ideas and being willing and flexible to have them just thrive and try things out.
Annika Reinhardt, Crystal Henrickson, they are Talent Collective, a consulting agency helping organizations grow their talent. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having us, Russell.
Thank you.